All right, so we've wrapped up our game res and our UVs and we're ready to bake. But before we get too far, there's one more option I want to make sure you know that you have available to you. And we're going to hop back into ZBrush for a second. So let's say you have a mesh in ZBrush and you already have it divided up into polygroups that you want to use as your UV seams. So if you're familiar with ZBrush's UV Master, it's the same idea. You divide up your mesh into polygroups and then you use those polygroup borders to dictate where your UV seams are. But you can do the exact same thing in Houdini. So what I'm going to do is send this over. I'm going to say send over visible. We're going to hop back into Houdini here. That's going to throw a new GoZ mesh in here. I'm going to do spacebar G to isolate or just to frame this mesh. And now if I middle mouse click over here, you're going to see we have two primitive attributes on this object. We have a name and we have a polygroup. If we go over here to the geometry spreadsheet, the name section right here, it's the same for the entire object because it is just one object. However, the polygroup has number IDs. So what I want to do is make these polygroup IDs easy to select. One way to do that is I can go in here and I can say rename attribute. I'm going to have this attribute selected, and we're going to change, again, if we hover over, or we middle mouse click on this, it's a primitive attribute. So we're going to go to the primitive tab, and we're going to say change name to whatever. I don't care what that is. It's changing the name attribute to whatever. And then I'm going to change the polygroup attribute to name. And what that's going to allow me to do is you see I now have access to those polygroup ID numbers as a selection. So if we have this arrow selected and then we do select by name attribute, because we've transferred the name to whatever and the polygroup to the name attribute, now when I middle mouse click over here, we have name and whatever as our two primitive attributes. I can now select these polygroup selections here. So how we mark those as our seams is we choose tab and then do game dev mark seams. So we're going to plug this in. And now we're just going to select this first polygroup here, and we're going to say make selection. Second one, make selection. Third one, make selection. Fourth one, make selection. And the last one, make selection. So now we have all these selections made. We can do a simple UV flatten. Go ahead and plug this in. And now when I hit spacebar 5 to go to our UVs, right now, it didn't do a very good job because we've got to go back to our UV flatten objects properties here and go to preserve seams. And that's going to take the seam attribute that we set here into our UV flatten. So now when I do spacebar 1 and we drop in a visualize UVs, we plug this in and we say visualize islands, you're going to see that our polygroups are on separate islands now. And again, spacebar 5, you're going to see each individual polygroup that we had is now split up into its own UV island.